So, the Marvel Universe, the MCU, that's the one everyone says is good, right? I guess comparatively it looks pretty amazing compared to its competition. But as much as I love seeing the smart talking character with attitude fight the bad guy who shoots a laser into the sky, or whatever, I have to say that while these movies are admittedly pretty fun and enjoyable for the most part, the lack of any dramatic tension makes each new release more and more boring and predictable for me.
So with Star Wars dying, it's time to talk about something else. Something that is also dying, but no one really sees it. The MCU is a phenomenon. The ability to have such unknown characters become literal faces of the media is impressive. You see Marvel characters everywhere. I even saw them on a sticker on bananas at the store. It's obviously successful, but that success is going down, and going down big. But why, and how? How could the probably second most profitable franchise, right behind Star Wars, go down? It's very obvious, it's just not a simple fix. I mean, how could I even say that it's going down with movies such as Infinity War and Endgame being so popular? Well, it's because of those movies. I've seen a bunch of problems with the rest of the MCU. I mean, look at it. There are a few good movies, one great movie, and the rest are just mediocre or worse. No matter how much you love the MCU, you have to admit the quality isn't and was never really there.
While the obvious intention by Marvel is to keep every story on the same path and timeline, what actually happens is that every film within that phase follows the same pattern. In that same pattern resides the issue, genuine fatigue. In phase 1 we had these films, origin films, all with one unifying goal to set up the Avengers. Now that wasn't an issue, since we needed to connect with and learn about these characters. The issue arrives when the Avengers concludes and phase 2 begins. This here is phase 2, an entire slate that, bar Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man, operates as a way of showing the growing contrivances between certain superheroes. And because every film works with the same themes and ideas, we essentially end up with a cluster of tiring, similar films. Phase 2 exists merely to allow each film to slowly establish the Infinity Stones. Yet because almost every film is dealing with the Infinity Stone in either nuanced or extremely obvious ways, the actual plot and characters feel subservient to this MacGuffin.
So, the formula is something Marvel fans talk about all the time. There's a very specific formula for making a quote-unquote good movie. And it's more than just basic plot stuff, but also general ideas in each movie or phase. So for general ideas, the MacGuffins that show up as main plot points in almost every MCU film. Yes, it makes sense that the Infinity Stones are showing up because that's the point of the Infinity Saga, setting up Infinity War and Endgame, but every story seems to be based around those stones, even if they are different stones, and they all feel the same. As bad as it sounds, a lot of the movies have the same plot. The characters seem like background to the main idea, which is not what the movie should be. The characters and the plot should be the main focus, while hints and points to building the universe should be in the background. Take Guardians of the Galaxy. This movie does it well. Even though the Infinity Stone is the main focus of the plot, the characters are more important. Building the relationships of the team, Gamora and Thanos, it all works very well. Now take Age of Ultron. The main point is setting up other movies. I mean, the movie itself is basically a trailer for Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, and Captain America Civil War, but even then it focuses way too much on the Infinity Stones, to lose the fear that Ultron tries to have, while also making the main characters not really have any story, are all passed off to worry more about the Infinity Stones. The idea of not caring about the characters but then caring about the overall plot is not okay. The only characters people truly care about are the original Avengers because, other than Captain America, their origins have nothing to do with the stones, and seem as though the characters mean more than the 20 movie long plot. That's why people glorify the Phase 1 movies, even though they aren't that good. I even said Captain America's origin had to do with the stones, but his actual origin is separate and the audience cares about his character. That's why movies like Captain America Winter Soldier or Civil War are seen as good movies, because they focus on the characters and forwarding their stories and not the universal Infinity Stone story. But that's only copy and paste of MacGuffin. There's also the second part of the formula, which is the villains.
Villains feel as though they have been written as cliched evil beings, and instead of having some sort of power over the superhero in question, they also feel as though they are just simply a roadblock. They exist merely to allow the superhero to give the illusion of struggle before ultimately obliterating said villain with ease.
I'll give you 5 seconds to name 5 MCU villains. You probably said Thanos, Loki, Winter Soldier, Mysterio, and Killmonger. These 5 villains have one or two things in common. They are all very recent villains from more popular movies, Mysterio from Spider-Man and Killmonger from Black Panther, but the other 3, Thanos, Loki, and Winter Soldier, are the only 3 that appear in more than 2 movies. I'm saying because Claw is in Age of Ultron as well as Black Panther, but is one of the most forgettable MCU villains. Why is that? Why can the most recent villain be more popular than a villain who appears in 2 very popular, whether good or bad, movies? This is a major flaw with Marvel movies. The villain seems like nothing. I mean, Red Skull has only become popular because of his return in Infinity War and Endgame, but what about the others? Now, no one expects every villain to be famous, but with 23 movies there should be more than 3 that are very popular. But because the villains are nothing but bumps, they mean nothing. The villains in each movie are expendable, and none offer much character development for the main hero. What does Whiplash do for Iron Man? Other than him needing a sidekick, which is dropped in the next movie completely, what does Whiplash do? What does Hammer do? Nothing. What does the Bumblebee do for Ant-Man? Nothing. Ronan does nothing for the Guardians, but he makes an appearance in Captain Marvel, so yeah. Other than recurring villains, which include Loki, Winter Soldier, and Thanos, and 2 of those become heroes, no villains have a real effect on the heroes. This kills any tension in the movies. And since Infinity War introduced the concept of villains' development and struggle with Philosopher Thanos, every other villain will live in his shadow. That's the problem with Endgame. Its villain is just another big, bad, scary dude who happens to have the name Thanos, referred to as Warrior Thanos because that's all he is, a fighter. Infinity War or Philosopher Thanos has a struggle, and when he tells Scarlet Witch,
"Today I lost more than you can know,"
he really does, because the audience watched him have to kill his daughter who he loved. Before Thanos, every other villain walked in the shadows of Loki and Winter Soldier, only because they were reoccurring and had actual character arcs. A lot have credited Mysterio to be a good villain, and I agree with that for the most part. His motive is rooted back to Tony Stark, which is the second Spider-Man villain like this, but he definitely looks like he will have a long-term effect on Spider-Man, so he seems to be a good step out, and will probably be a more memorable villain for the MCU. But that's just one, and it's in its newest film. The rest of the MCU has horrible, basic, and boring villains that honestly are cool and exciting at first, but bore the audience on even a second viewing. I know still to this day, I rewatch Infinity War because of Thanos. Because the heroes are reaching their ends and their final arcs can be completed in Endgame, the movie can make its villain its main character, which works so well. I had an old script for reviewing the character of Thanos and how every scene he's in, and scenes he's not even in but mentioned in, his characterization grows and becomes cooler, and having breaks showing him and young Gamora on her planet all show how cool he is. No other villain is like this, not even Loki or Winter Soldier. A bad thing about these villains is that they are just the hero but bad. Iron Man versus big scary Iron Man. Captain America versus deformed Super Soldier. Ant-Man versus other shrinking man. Hulk versus Orange Hulk, Black Panther versus glowy Killmonger, and so on. They're all just the hero but bad. Even interesting characters like Loki and Winter Soldier are just their respective heroes but evil. Having cool new powers like Vulture and Mysterio are good at creating interesting villains. It's not fun to watch the same powers go against each other in a fistfight. It's more fun to watch the hero have to figure out how their powers help against the villain's powers. This is showed well in Far From Home. Peter has to figure out that his electric webs help to destroy the drones that Mysterio has. This is good and works very well for the plot, but the worst part of these villains is their plans. All of them put the world in danger, which is honestly becoming boring at this point. We want a personal villain. This worked well with the first few because they were personal but also tried to destroy the world. Obi was Tony's mentor. Red Skull was Cap's mentor, former subject. Thor and Loki are brothers. But other than that, there's a very small connection that makes the world taking over interesting. If the villains came on a more personal level and affected the hero's character more, then the audience wouldn't forget about them. It might not be the reason we remember Thanos, but it's why we remember Winter Soldier and Loki. They have such a personal effect on the heroes, and it actually affects how they think and act, and their takeover the world plans are acceptable because they work around the personal. The action is secondary to the characters, not the other way around. There are too many villains in the MCU to get a personal one for all of them, and we are too far along to get any new character developments, but in the future, having characters with backstories like Mysterio, who actually makes the hero change, then it would be good. I was watching a video and they suggested that with pre-established characters, make the movies be about fleshing out the villains, so that their struggle against the hero's struggle is more interesting. It's hard to do and shouldn't be expected out of every MCU villain, but more than 3 villains should be well-rounded characters, because with future villains, there will be no tension for the hero. It's boring to watch the same struggle over and over again, but who remembers most of the struggles anyways? I know I don't.
While a studio with any sanity or restraint at all might announce a film about 2 years ahead of time, Marvel has announced a slew of new films that are set to be released between now and 2019. 2019! Marvel will throw names casually onto a giant production assembly line and just hope they have an idea for a good film when they get around to it.
There are a lot of movies in the MCU. A lot. I mean, it's bad that most of the movies start to blend together. And not just for the repetitious formulas that we talked about, but there are a few movies that are special. The origin movies always stand out, but that's expected. Avengers 1 is a pretty good movie that obviously was revolutionary, but I watched every movie in the weeks leading up to Endgame's release, and I don't remember more than half of them. The first 2 Thor movies basically don't exist on the fan base, especially not over how well made and different Ragnarok was. There are so many movies in Phase 3 that I can't even name all of them, and most of them were just rewritings of the same story with different characters and a different power. Even the cast can't name all the movies, and they're supposed to be the leading figureheads for this universe.
Can you name all the previous 18 Marvel films?
Oh my god, we have to get
So, okay, Iron Man.
Wait.
Okay. Go.
Thor 1, Thor 2, Thor 3, Captain America 1, Civil War, Winter Soldier, Infinity War, Age of Ultron, Avengers 1, Endgame, Ant-Man,
Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3.
Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Black Panther, Doctor Strange,
Thor Ragnarok,
Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor Ragnarok, Thor the Dark World.
This is first.
So this is...
Then I'm going to say it's this.
Captain Marvel, The Guardians 1, Guardians 2.
No, this isn't working. We're in trouble.
We are.
Ant-Man.
Yeah.
And the Wasp.
Yeah.
Ant-Man and the Wasp. The second
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Volume 2.
Yeah, Volume 2.
I think you might have done them all.
Tom Holland.
So Spider-Man,
Yeah.
Spider-Man 1, 2, 3, and
Another sequel.
the Guardians, the Wasp.
Yep.
Ant-Man, the Wasp.
One more.
Ant-Man, Wasp.
2 seconds, 1 second. Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange.
Should we give it to you?
But the biggest thing is none of the movies are special anymore. Phase 1, no matter the quality, was full of special moments. The originals had a different sense of storytelling. The same thing came back with the Guardians movie. It seemed special. Now all the movies seem forced. With 3 movies coming out a year, it feels like a YouTuber with a schedule. The content is not stuff they are passionate to make, but make only for money. And with that, the quality goes down. The same thing happened with the MCU movies. They started off with good quality, and if not, they at least cared about the directions the movie went in. After Age of Ultron, the movies cared more about setting up Infinity War than actually telling stories for the characters. The only 2 movies that seem to avoid this are Guardians 2 and Civil War, but even Civil War is setting up for the separation of Infinity War. And Iron Man is literally 1 second away from calling Captain America when the flying donut shows up and stops him. And now with Infinity War's quality and uniqueness, all the others seem to have the same story and are boring. More movies like Black Panther and Captain Marvel are overhyped because of their social justice rights that are for some reason excusing their poor writing. And there is one that is much worse than the other. At least Black Panther had a villain with an interesting goal and a good foil for the hero, while Captain Marvel is just a complete SJW message with no care for not only an interesting villain but a complex and interesting hero. Black Panther changes in his movies and his effects are seen directly in Infinity War. Captain Marvel has every power you can think of for some reason without a good struggle other than being a female, which makes you lose about 80% of your audience. I swear, the only reason that movie made money is because it was plopped between Infinity War and Endgame, and had Samuel L. Jackson. And this is bad for the future of the MCU. It's mediocre now, but at least it has some interesting heroes. Even after losing Iron Man, Captain America, and other founders, they still have good backups with Spidey, Doctor Strange, and possibly Black Panther if they don't focus on the SJW stuff. But if they continue to go down the Captain Marvel path, they could ruin the future because the characters like Black Panther won't become classics, but horrible flat characters that are overpowered. Remember when Iron Man had to build his suit in a cave?
With a box of scraps!
Cap had to deal with being a stage guy even though he was a superhero. Spidey had to struggle with Iron Man's death. Even Black Panther had to struggle with his father's death. And that's decent, if not good, story writing. Captain Marvel just had to stand up 3 times. She doesn't even learn how to use her powers, she's just always had it. And the villain tries to restrain it, but she never really does that. And then as she's falling, she can just fly, like she knows how to fly. Iron Man learned the icing thing and used it to his advantage. She can just fly without knowing she could fly. But the SJW message blinds a lot of people to the idea that the movie is bad. And now they make it acceptable to pass that bad writing. And if this continues, that means it only ruins the MCU, not saving it. A lot of the humor is funny. Tony's little quips in most of the movies he's in, and the new humor Spider-Man brings is all very good. But there is a lot wrong with the humor in most of the movies. Infinity War only has one joke in the final act, but a lot of the movies kill the tension with not so funny jokes. It's the same problem that The Last Jedi has. Emotional moments, then there's a joke in the middle of it. As much as it makes sense and is in character, the dance battle to save the galaxy ruined that moment. It's just a joke that somehow worked and makes no sense. Even Iron Man reacts because it makes no sense. And that's one of the good movies. The audience is tired of the humor. They laugh the first time, and then rewatches are boring because the humor doesn't really stay funny. Infinity War managed to not ruin scenes with humor, as close as they were to it, but a lot of the scenes in the rest of the MCU get ruined.
An hour?
Are you serious?
I've mastered the ability of standing so incredibly still that I've become invisible to the eye.
People create smaller people. Children. I lost the word there. Children.
It's me. It's Steve. Steve, come on. Steve. I thought you were dead. I thought you were smaller. Come on. What happened to you? I joined the army.
Stop.
I'm not saying humor is bad, well-placed humor is good. The Thor and Cap talking during fights is good, they're friends and them talking makes sense. But other ones don't make sense, and a lot show up in Endgame, and that's the future of the MCU. There are a lot in Far From Home, and most are well-placed, and it works in that movie because of the characters. But it won't work for all of the movies. It won't work for Captain Marvel movies, because she isn't an interesting character who makes good jokes. It barely works with Doctor Strange, but they're going to continue to do it. And that's bad for the future of the MCU. Because the humor now is bearable. It won't become bearable with characters no one cares about making the jokes that are horribly out of place. No one has talked about this yet, and I think it's because no one wants to face the truth of it. I said earlier that all the villains are going to live in Thanos' shadow, and in a similar way, all the movies are going to live in Infinity War and Endgame shadow. As unfair as it is, those are the two best in the MCU. Although Infinity War is objectively better, a lot of fans love Endgame, which is understandable. Both broke the formula, and their emotional endings are great, and we can see in Far From Home that Thanos will have a lasting effect on the MCU. But it's more than just the villain. The heroes are forever affected. Iron Man died, Cap got old, Thor got fat. Look at the rest of the MCU now. Avengers 1, nothing compared to Endgame. None of the standalone films can even stand. Not even Winter Soldier or Thor Ragnarok, which were debatably the best until Infinity War came out. But once Infinity War was released, they were swept under the rug. And if everything else was already under the rug compared to them, then they are all, well, mediocre. The same thing will happen in the future. No movie is going to live up to Avengers Endgame, and it will continue to create mediocre movies. The second effect of Infinity War and Endgame is now that the universe is building towards nothing. There is no end anymore. And at least with the Infinity Saga movies, there was a plot that was being focused on, so every movie made the fans excited for the next. Now there is no threat. There is no Thanos, and there never will be again. There won't be a well-made villain who's more than just a big bad guy for the Avengers to fight. And there won't be any more tension leading up to it. The Infinity Stones worked because they were almost like little Easter eggs in each movie, as much as the movies focused on them too much, but they all led up to a single point. But now with the ever-expanding universe, it's hard to have all the sections combined. There's no one thing that is ever going to bring the Avengers together as natural as Infinity War did. The MCU isn't bad. I never said that and will never say it, hopefully. The MCU is great, but the movies within it are just mediocre. My biggest fear is that they'll continue to become worse and worse, and this MCU will just be a load of garbage. And being such a cultural phenomenon, it's a shame the movies don't have more quality. The same thing happened with Star Wars. Sorry to keep mentioning it, but it's an easy topic to compare to. Marvel is in a much better state than Star Wars, but it's clearly going down. If you enjoyed this video, go check out our other videos. We have full reviews on The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, and response videos, a new favorite and least favorite scene series, and more videos like this to come, so subscribe for more content.